so nice to see you.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk today about the impact that high-test testing have had in education. I know you had a lot of experience, so it's going to be really nice to share with the audience about it. And we're going to start with, I would like to get your opinion. And what is the difference between the education before and after the No Child Left Behind? What do you think about that? What's the difference between the education before and after the No Child Left Behind?
Well, there was a lot of differences, and one of them is that the curriculum wasn't so standardized across, there wasn't what they call now fidelity of curriculum. So you could be in classroom A and then go to classroom B, and they could be doing two very different things. And since the No Child Left Behind came in and all of the subsequent regulations that came in and standards that came in, the whole teaching profession has gotten much more standardized, so that it's decided the districts every school district has to, follow certain grade level standards. Now, Massachusetts was always way ahead of the game. I mean, we are one of the best systems around. We're one of the most progressive, and so what was happening in our state was not typical of what was going on in the rest of the country. So Massachusetts was always on the forefront of innovation, and we were probably much further along in providing a quality education. But when you take into account 50 states, and you think of rural states and southern states and states that are less well affluent than Massachusetts, it was a very different standard from state to state on education. And I saw that years ago when I taught down in Virginia right out of college. I was in a county school. It was a semi-rural area, and there were 5 schools. And even though it was supposedly integrated, this was in the mid-1970s, and it was only in the South a few years after desegregation, like within the 10 years after desegregation. And even though the schools were supposedly equal, I would travel to 5 different schools in this county, and the schools that mostly serviced the higher income and the white children had incredibly better school buildings, much more educated teachers, much better facilities. Then you'd go to the more rural schools that mostly serviced poor white children and black children, and the buildings would be decrepit. A lot of the teachers couldn't even speak very good. They didn't even speak what we call the King's English. The standards were just deplorably lower in the same school system. So I can understand why when a federal regulation comes out, it's looking at the country as a whole. It's not just looking at our state, which wasn't the reason for No Child Left Behind. Massachusetts didn't need it as much as other places did.
But just to have everybody at the same level.
Right, to have some kind of a national standard, and to make sure that, students were being held to a certain level of competency at each grade level, so that when they got done, so that a diploma from Oklahoma was as valuable as a diploma from North Carolina. I'm not going to use Massachusetts because nobody's diploma is as good as ours, but go ahead.
And so when you were teaching, what do you think, what was the impact of these testings in your teaching?
All right, well, I never taught. I was a school psychologist when I started out. Right out of college I did teach, but that was only for 2 years. Then I went to grad school to become a school psychologist, and that was many years ago when I was in my early 20s. And then I became a school psychologist, and one of the things I can tell you, because in my role, I've always done observations on students, and so I get into everybody's classroom. I probably have seen more about what goes on in classrooms than most people, because I'm in there under the guise of observing the student, and that's what I'm really doing, but you can't help but notice the quality of the teaching and the way the teacher, her behavioral management or his behavioral management and all those kind of things. So what I can tell you is, before these national and state standards came out, there was a huge discrepancy from classroom to classroom on the quality of what was going on, even in Massachusetts, okay? And after No Child Left Behind came into being. Now, I left education for 17 years, and when I came back, it was in the early 2000s, and it was 2 years after NCLB had been passed by the legislature. So I came in 2 years later, and I came back, and I really was astounded at the difference, both positive and negative,
Oh.
in what was happening in public schools. From a positive perspective, I like the fact that teacher A, teacher B, and teacher C are all expected to be teaching the same thing with fidelity, which is in the language of No Child Left Behind, and that there is some kind of quantitative measurement of a child's progress. I think that's helpful. It's helpful if the data is used to then improve instruction, you know. What wasn't as positive about it is for those highly creative teachers, the amount of curriculum that was being mandated and how far you had to get in that curriculum across subject areas was squeezing out the ability of teachers to do some of the more creative, and I have to say some of the more multidisciplinary or integrative kinds of activities, for instance, putting on plays and doing special projects and doing the kinds of things that take time away from the core curriculum. Those were being squeezed out.
And do you think that's the case right now in schools?
Definitely. Because, if anything, the stakes have gotten even higher. I mean, No Child Left Behind had a lot of problems with it, but it was also a first attempt to try to standardize education in the United States, and I think it was a necessary thing, even though I'm not necessarily in agreement with all of the parts of it.
Yeah.
The Common Core, which has come out, you know, under the in this last, in Obama's first term, I really like a lot of what it's asking for. And instead of just states having individual standards, states have been, you know, given the option of joining the Common Core standards. And Massachusetts standards were already probably more stringent or equally as high expectations as the Common Core standards. So we, you know, Massachusetts, you know, volunteered to be part of it. In order to get the Race to the Top money, you had to be part of the Common Core. But I think that, and now what's going to happen is the high stakes testing is going to change, and it's going to be a national thing. And the reason I like the Common Core is, this was the other thing I saw in my role as a school psychologist, a child would move in from another state. We live in a highly mobile society, okay? You didn't see that so often 30 years ago when I first started in education. Getting a new child was a big deal. Now they're in and out, people get transferred, you know.
From schools too.
And you get a child, and in fact, even we would say, even within a state, you get a child, and if we'd see the town they came from, we'd say, oh boy. Because for most of my career, I worked in middle and upper middle class school systems, and so we'd say, oh my goodness, they came from this town. There's no way this child has learned as much as our kids have learned, okay? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And especially when they came from a state that was in a geographically different area of the country. If it wasn't on the coast,
Yeah.
it was inland or south, we would be concerned, okay? Especially if it was southern states and rural states. And so now with the Common Core, we're supposed, you know, the states that I know, last I'm not up to date on the latest data, but it was 37 or 30, you know, there were many states out of the 50 that had initially decided to join it. Eventually, I think there's going to be enough peer pressure for all of them to join it. But that means now that if some child moves in from a district in another state to Massachusetts, they shouldn't be so out of sync with the curriculum. They shouldn't be. That doesn't mean, you know.
Yeah.
But it's trying to be a leveling effect at a higher, you know, raising the bar across geographic areas and school districts so that kids are learning the same curriculum, the same standards, no matter where you send your child to school. That's the goal. That's not what happens in reality.
Well, and that's interesting. Do you think that high stakes testing is like objectively measures all students' performance, or you don't think?
Well, of course not. I'm a school psychologist. I believe that there are so many individual differences in learning, and that there are many children who are terrible test takers, who have high anxiety over these high stake tests, especially, and many of them perform what you're getting out of their performance is not going to be a true measure of what they really know in a different setting. And I'm not sure that it's possible with a pencil and paper test to truly measure a child's thinking abilities and problem-solving abilities. And I subscribe to the, and also not just to mention the fact that acculturation has a huge impact on what a child brings to education and what they know. And these high-state tests are really based on American English-speaking culture. All right, and students that don't have that background, although they may be very intelligent, may not look so good on these tests. And then those are children with special needs that are never going to be able to pass them. Certain subsets of kids, like kids on the spectrum, kids with Asperger's, whatever. I've personally been in a position of sitting to try to get a very, very bright child, for instance, with Asperger's.